Yeah, whawhataitele lava, Deb, molo whaawhelua inga le nei tae au, whaamalo ma whaawhelua atu fo'i ina mamalu o whaia onga mesi fo'i o nisi sui o lo mawhai ona awa no la tō taimi le nei fo'i aso, whawhatai whaamalo ia sanga whaamanu atu ia o to uma, I le swafa tō taspa i o tātua tua. No hea o, ko sa vali o le while mu toko wakahahi, ko vai a toku maunga, ko te mona nui a kiwa toku moana, no hāmoa ahau. Gee! Ko whasta uta me whangalo o ku iwi, ko sali oa me maasina o ku hapu. Ko Aiono tā vita rawa ko Senetanari o ku tupuna. Ko e whakasa Greylin tōku whare karaki ara tōku marae hoki. Ko e ono pulumiro rawa ko awmasanga vaiola o ku mātua. Toko ono ku tūngani. Ko loma semi atu takutāne engari kua mati e nai nei. Ko ai ono Manu whaia tōku ingoa. Nō reira, e koe te tui, e kete te kāka, e kūku te kiriru. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I always choose to mihi and te reo Māori because as a Samoan born in New Zealand, I'm a product of the migrant story. My parents came to work in factories in the early 70s, and I was born here 5 years after they migrated. And I like this particular whakatauki. If you've been paying attention to my pepeha, Aiono is actually a chief name. So it's a name that has been gifted to me from my father. It's very unusual for a father and a daughter to share the same high chief title, but that's because in my family, we're all about service, all about tautua. And so my father and my mother have raised me to really focus on service and what we can do for others. So in my way of living, and this particular whakatauki speaks to me because Manu means the same in Te Reo Māori and Reo Hamoa. And so for me, in terms of my different types of personalities, Deb's really talked about the different roles that I've held in terms of gifted, but also just Pacific education in general. So the tui sings, I'm a musician by trade. I studied a music degree at university. My parents were responsible for that. At the time, I actually wanted to be a lawyer. I was really into Matlock and watching Perry Mason, after school programs at the time. Angela Lansbury, Murder, She Wrote, all of this kind of solving mystery stuff. And but my parents, they wanted me to do a music degree to prove to people at church that I was music literate. So, being the obedient Samoan girl, that's what you do. So the Tui sings, so for me, that resonates with my music side of things, and being invited to speak here today speaks more to the knowledge and expertise and skills. I'm still learning, I'm still growing, but that's part of my kind of manaki to people is making sure that we, really tautoko each other in the things that we say. The kaka kegels. So I have a really great sense of humor. It was really great to hear Dr. Matt just before me. I've also listened to Janelle in the first session as well. I'm in a lot of meetings that I'm in, a lot of hui, a lot of whonu. I tend to crack a lot of jokes to kind of divert attention away from some, pretty contentious issues at times. And, e kuku te kiriru, sometimes in those same types of meetings, I might have to calm people down. So I'm a bit of a peacemaker. So I really use all of my skills I've learnt growing up as a child in New Zealand, but within my Samoan nuclear family and my extended family, and I take those things with me. So when Janelle talked before about things that we do in our families and our communities and our hapori, our iwi, our hapu, our papakainga that we do well, and sometimes these things are not really visible in formal learning settings. So yeah, we'll talk more about that as we go through this presentation. I've called this presentation Arise Moana, and this is an excerpt of a translation of, I actually wrote a song. I composed a piece. I was commissioned to write one for Dr. Jenny Wallerman. She is a senior lecturer in voice at the School of Music at the Victoria University of Wellington. And so it was premiered as part of a concert featuring 21 by 21 women composers. I was the only Pacific female composer in that space, and I have imposter syndrome, I think, oh, I'm not a composer, but I have things in my head, and then, I get to notate them and perform them and play around with them. So that was my first kind of commissioned work, and it was for a major festival. So yeah, but freaking out about that, but really excited about it. But the reason why I'm sharing this particular excerpt of the song, because the song talks about Moana as in kind of three layers. Moana is an individual, Moana is the ocean itself, but also Moana in terms of a conversation, of a legacy conversation between a parent and child. So I know people in my family and my friends who are named Moana, and they're both male or female. So, Moana is a very significant name in lots of families around the connection to the ocean, but also just people that they're named after as well. So I'll give you some feedback from a student about this piece later on. I can't share with you what it sounds like because it will be featured in part of a concert series for Radio New Zealand at some point as well later in the year. Deb's kind of talked to you about the different hats. Here's an updated list of things that I'm involved in. It sometimes can be very draining and very lonely, very isolating. A lot of my passion lately has been in gifted education, but also looking at the kind of space where does Pacific fit within Te Tiriti. So I'm working towards developing a Pacific Tauiwi position. It's a very new thing, and that's a lot of government agencies are trying to work towards that now. So I have a lot to do with the NCA Pathways panel, the kind of review of achievement standards through my tertiary lens, but also through the refresh of the New Zealand curriculum. So I'm involved in that in terms of the bicultural and inclusive group, which is looking at really laying the foundations for Te Tiriti to be embedded right throughout the New Zealand curriculum. So it's one of my passion areas in that space. So secondary trained, but my passion for Pacific education is from cradle to grave, and I've been a cross-sector facilitator in that space for a while. I will be sharing with you kind of snippets of research along the way, because I feel that the only way that I could really contribute to the landscape of gifted Pacific research is to do it, to keep searching for meaning. And that's what I love about research. I see it as a mindset, it's a lifestyle, and that if you're going to contribute thinking and ideas and concepts that will help your peoples or help people generally that don't have a voice, it's really important to work very closely with them on those aspects. So when we think about how do we affirm our gifted Pacific learners, and I think about three different things, and I talked about that in the abstract for today's keynote. So how do we honor Pacific heritages, languages, and cultures? And I'll talk about this theme in the later part of the presentation because I'll thread that through. And what we need to remember, though, that is that Pacific cultures are not homogenous. I always get, people look at me, I'm Samoan, I said it no hamo aho, and people will speak to me in Tongan or speak to me in Kokala Māori, and like, yeah, I know I'm Pacific, but I don't speak that reo, but that's on my list of things to learn. But you kind of learn different kupu along the way to get by, and you have friends from different Pacific nations too. And even though I am Samoan and Samoa is one of the biggest island nations, I deliberately use the strength that I have within my own culture and grounding in that space to help elevate and raise other smaller Pacific nations that have smaller populations and have little voice. So really helping to champion them through that to help them honor their heritages is really important to me. And one way I've been able to do that is through publishing work. So this is a recent piece which was published this year, 2020, just published about privileging notions of Pacific success and higher settings. And there's contention there around measures of testing, assessment, what's really important for us. And so encourage you, we'll share this presentation after and we'll be able to send links, but I'm really open to people engaging with me about, what you read. Kind of the really humbling thing for me is that, as I said before, I was secondary trained and I taught junior music, junior to senior music, social studies, English, even taught art, even taught health, sex ed. That was another funny subject and time for that, other stories. But yeah, having the opportunity to teach students and then reconnect with them later, we've been doing postgrad work, and now they're reading my work as in other spaces. So it's a very humbling experience to have impact on students twice in their life. That's crazy, but when you're in those unique positions, it's important to stay connected. This is probably one of the key things in the work that I have to do is when I've done professional learning development in this space is how do I help people to challenge, their own assumptions about defining giftedness? And people will tend to look at giftedness in the way that they feel most comfortable. Janelle talked before about providing wedgies for everyone today. And yeah, I kind of operate along similar lines, but I also like to kind of gently guide people along and make them feel as if you know, I like to create safe spaces for people to be vulnerable about what they don't know. And I want to talk to you later about how to do that when you're coming to really increase your knowledge and increase your capability, for how to really make sure that what you're doing enhances and whakamanas back to our Pacific learners. So this is where it all started for me. You notice the names are a bit different there because, I became a chief in 2016 and this article was written in 2011. And that was when I was teaching at Rutherford College and was asked to write about, what creates some identifiers for giftedness by, talking with the parent communities of the school that I was teaching at. So this was in addition to my work. This wasn't something that I actually fell into that and became passionate about it because I was able to use my subject matter of music, which is all about feelings and emotions and expression. And I was able to use that as a way to connect with students and really help raise their emotional intelligence, whilst at the same time connecting with teachers that they really struggled to really learn from. So I would use the staff room as the place to go and, not attack these teachers, but kindly, have a coffee with them and ask them, hey, you've got the student in your class, what's the go there, what's happening? And I was able to advocate for students in that space. So I've used this article and had students read it, had friends, children or friends read it, primary school, intermediate, and high school, tertiary, and we've unpacked it together as extended family. And it's been really good conversations to have with students about where they see themselves, in terms of self-determination or success. So how do we go about then eliciting these gifts and talents? There's no one way of doing it. And I think people have always said, you have to know your learner. And that's important. And what's frustrating for me in other circles was when people say know your learner, you actually have to really unpack what those steps could look like. And for me, importantly, because I'm sometimes not a fan of that phrase too, or what does it look like? For me, it's more about what does it feel like? Because students should be able to feel valued, celebrated, and just really happy to be in the world, and all their vulnerabilities and all of their state of incompletion, and as they're trying to grow as well. And as our responsibility as adults, what are we doing to make sure that we um, really honor those gifts and talents coming through? So from that first article in 2011, I did a master's degree, and Deb talked about that before. And I talked about this analogy where I look at gifted Pacific learners as transformers, the lovely 80s 80s animated cartoon. But when I think about Pacifica, it's that misconception that people have about, whether they are gifted or not, and I think the experiences I've had, not only researching, but connecting with and being related to gifted people and being labeled one myself as a child growing up, um, is just really asking them about, what are the expectations of people? How do they see you? And I think I use that analogy of the Transformers because for gifted Pacific learners, they don't know whether they're going to be an Autobot or a Decepticon. Because when they think about being a Decepticon, that might be the teacher's negative expectation for that learner. Whereas if they are strong enough and staunch in their identity and who they are, and the fact that they know that they are boto, that they are ilo, that they are gifted in the areas that their families value, then they'll be staunch enough to sustain that, and they'll be able to be an Autobot no matter what, So it's really good to be an Autobot, but not a bots. Okay, that's another different thing. We'll talk about that another time. If there are any Samoans in the room, they'll know what I'm talking about. So Pacific research methodologies, I wanted to kind of skirt over into this space because this helps to give you a kind of idea around how I position Pacific methodologies to then springboard into really good application with students around how to do these things. So you're probably familiar with Talanoa, and everyone talks about conversations. Talanoa is really open conversations that there's no time limit. So when you're conducting research and you're saying you're using Talanoa methodology, you got to really explain very clearly that your application of it, what were your experiences of it? It's not enough just to say this is what it is, but really talk about, the intricacies and complexities of what you faced when you use this methodology. Because I'm always keen for people to add new knowledge to what's already been there. Whanawhale model is from the health sector to Bye-Bye's Hodges work on, collaboration. So if you're thinking about a patchwork quilt, that's what that looks like. But I did want to talk to you about the Kakala framework, and I use this in a space where that's how we get to really improve the teaching and learning for teachers of gifted learners. So if you're not familiar with the Kakala framework, there are 4 phases. It's designed by Professor Konai Helu-Feynman, very, very famous Tongan scholar. And then there was an iteration of this in 2014 by Johansen 4. So that's the things that are labeled red, number 5 and 6. But I just want to step you through this to help you think about, these are some ways, this is a process that you can use to kind of sense check for yourself what you're doing for your gifted Pacific learners. So I like to ask lots and lots of questions. And the reason for that is because I'm a fan of fertile questions. Because when you're able to ask yourself a question, you keep asking yourself more and more to keep checking, to keep making sure that you're on the right track and you're not following down a path that is actually veering away from what's in the best interest of that gifted Pacific learner. So the first question I ask to prepare for how I'm going to engage with gifted Pacific is, how are you going to celebrate it? You might think, oh, celebration's at the end of something. But for me and my strengths-based thinking, my outcome solutions, outcomes-oriented focus, I see the celebration first because it helps me to get learners to understand that when we do things, it's all about aiming for that goal, whatever that goal is. And for every student, it's at their personal best, So we can't enforce, oh, it has to be this way. But when we get to know our learner, ask lots of questions, we'll be able to find ways to elicit those gifts and talents. But you've got to build that trust. So how do we go about, having that relational trust? So thinking about, what efforts could you make then to become more culturally responsive? If you know for a fact that you're not, then try and seek ways to connect with people, online resources, find some key groups that you can join. There's lots of online resources about it and websites, and I'll share them with you towards the end of the presentation. And thinking about whether you go to make the effort at all, what difference is that going to make? Because we should know on the inside how it feels. This is why I'm a huge fan of, I don't care what things look like, I'm interested in what it feels like, because feelings are important for our students to understand. And the reason why I keep reiterating feelings is because well-being, Pacific well-being in terms of connecting to Pacific giftedness, is a huge space. And the Ministry of Pacific Peoples is working on a Pacific well-being strategy at the moment. So everything is quite timely. In terms of the weaving and pulling it together, New Zealand has 9 Pacific Language Weeks that we celebrate. The first one is coming in May, and it's Rotuma Language Week. If you're not familiar with Rotuma, it's a smaller island that's near Fiji. It's kind of, people compare it to, it's like Samoan Tokelau or Samoan Tuvalu, similar language, although Rotuma has some Germanic kind of influences in terms of colonization. So how do we extend our knowledge and our kind of embracing of these customs, beliefs, and traditions beyond the language week? So it's not just 1 week, but how do we ensure that every opportunity that we can, we're fostering that sense of environment where it's conducive for Pacific learners, it's conducive for gifted Pacific learners and their families. In terms of the gifting, here's one final question, and this is something I think about very carefully. This is something I always remind educators, and I even say this to students too, to ask them, like, how do you know that what your teacher does is going to make your life better every time you come to school? So that's just a simple way of breaking down that question. But yeah, how will your educator actions impact those daily lives? And you might think, Aiono, that's a lot of time. I don't have time to think about that. And yeah, everyone's very busy, and there's research that shows, you probably heard teachers, make thousands of decisions every minute, of the day. So, it's really thinking critically of what do we need to do? What is our gift to our akonga? What's our gift to our tamaiti, to our whānau, when we're talking about our learning? So when I went through all of those different phases, we're now going to align this with the Cultural Intelligence Framework from Van Dyne, Allen Co in 2009. And these stages are very similar too, but I want you to look first at these metacognitive cultural intelligence indicators. So the metacognitive state is when you know you've got gaps in your knowledge. So if you know you've got some dire need to address how to connect with Pacific learners, these are the things you need to be thinking about. Like, you know that you need to do things, but you're kind of unsure about how to do it. So there's a sense of unfamiliarity in that space. Once you've figured out that you've got those gaps, now you're going to find out how you're going to fill those knowledge gaps that you have, whether it's going to be people or things or events like this one. And then thinking about when you go through those processes and critically self-reflect and even do meta-reflection, figuring out when you examine these things, what are the things that are the same? What are the things that are different? And it's not about what things are better in that sense. It's not about that superiority, but it's more about what can we do to ensure that, as Janelle talked about before, he mana tō tamaiti is honoured, but also that their gifts and talents will shine regardless of what we do as adults. This hard one here, a lot of the work I've done in the professional learning space this is the hardest one. How do you make people move to make these changes? Because you can say all the lovely things in the world, but if the individual is not prepared to move to make that change, what's going to happen after that? So it does involve a lot of stepping outside of yourself and really thinking carefully about, what is my motivation here? If I can change, or if I can adapt, if I can amend, if I can make some additions to my praxis and my thinking and my schema, how can I make sure that these things all align with the positive changes that I'm wanting? Which brings us to this final stage around, behavioral cultural intelligence. You'll be able to confidently, share your cultural intelligence stuff to others. And this, in my view, is the optimum level of cultural intelligence. You've done the mahi, you've done the hard yards of really talking through things with your students. You've talked with other staff, your peers, your other workers, just to kind of make sure everyone's on the same page about what is our collective effort here. Because as much as this is about an individual, for Pacific people, if we see you en masse doing things for everyone, yeah, that's something that we can relate to. So when we juxtapose these two systems, you can see it's very similar. And the Kakala framework was created in 1992, and the Cultural Intelligence Framework, which is a North American model, was created in 2009. Yes, I just wanted to align that just so you can see that, Pacific knowledges, they're there. But it's just making sure that people understand the integrity and making sure that everything is pono and tika in that space, and that you handle the knowledges and the experiences with care, so that when you go to share this with the world, it makes complete sense. So when we're looking into how do Pacific learners then articulate being gifted and brown. Well, I wanted to share this resource with you, which is part of the Talanoa Ako guided resources. And there's about 11 discrete pieces of information. And this particular screenshot is one that I authored. And this is actually going to be used as a roadmap or guide. So this was only launched probably 3 to 4 weeks ago. And it was an online launch. So these documents are now available in PDF form on the TKI Pacific community website, and also you can order copies for your schools and for your other communities in that space too. And the reason why I'm talking about this book, not just because I wrote it, but there's a page in this book where I made sure that there was gifted Pacific education qualities included in the booklet. And then at the bottom of it too, there's a where to from here, which invites people to go and actually, I point them in the right direction around, there's the collateral there, go and have a look, go and watch the video, go read the information, and take those back and use that with your teams to come up with things, and use them for your own staff meetings and departmental faculty syndicate discussions, kura discussions, everywhere that you feel the need to either elevate, raise the awareness of what giftedness means for your Pacific community. this is a way in which you can do that. Right. Sorry. I said before that there's the piece of music that I created, and part of this is, you know, the student feedback that I got from a student who is a voice student at Victoria University. So I've just shared with you, this is the kind of feedback that he gave me. He was given the piece to perform, and he's going to perform it at a concert for his recital performance as part of his degree. I think he's a third-year student. And the song was originally written for a soprano, but I've rewritten it for his voice, so he's able to perform it. I just want to draw your attention to the third bullet point. When I read that, I just thought, wow, this is why you do what you do. If you can create things of beauty that other gifted learners can appreciate and resonate with, that's something that they will hold fast to. And who knows, maybe this person will go on and, you know, create music of their own, you know, that can, you know, showcase what they value in terms of their backgrounds as well. So those are my contact details there. I've just whizzed through all this, but I'm happy to take some questions now, and only because I'm not available after 12:30. And I know Charlene's in the house. It's great that you're here to facilitate in that session. I'll just like whiz through this, but I'm happy to take some questions now for the next 10 minutes or so, because for Pacific people, we tala noa. So as much as this has been a keynote presentation like this, but if there are any questions in the chat, because I haven't looked at the chat yet, but if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them now, and then I'm happy to hand across to the sister Charlene to facilitate the session afterwards. So I'll just look through your questions. Yeah, if you just like to raise your hands or anything, I'm happy to do that now. Or if are there any other slides that you want me to go through, happy to go through that as well. Yeah, like the phrase fertile questions. Yeah. I think with our gifted Pacific learners, because there is a misconception that it's hard to see them as gifted, and for some people it's because, you know, you measure giftedness by what you know. And so I think it's important that you really get to know the communities that our students are from, so that when you're crafting what those identifiers of giftedness looks like for your particular community, that's the thing that needs to be done. And sometimes when you create things, you need to keep testing them, you need to keep checking, you need to keep going back, and you need to allow people to think about what it is they need to do in their space to continue the relationship. So when we're going out to our Pacific communities and asking them for information or asking them for their knowledge, you have to keep maintaining the relationship. You have to keep going back. You need to close the loop. So I'm conscious when I think about these things, when I'm going out to do facilitation work or speaking at events or just sharing with other kayako, it's really getting people to unpack. You know, Janelle's already talked before about mirrors or windows. I'm a mirrored person personally. I like to hold up a looking glass to people and kind of say to them, so this is you in the mirror. You tell me what you see, because it helps people think about, well, this is my starting point in terms of how I connect with Pacific learners. So you tell me, how do you engage with them? So they'll be able to tell me what they're looking at in the mirror. Okay, so this is what I see in the mirror. Then we have this conversation. Do you want to change what's in the mirror, or are you happy with where it's gone, or do you think there's room for improvement? Do you think what's in there is connecting well with our students? Do you think that they're getting the best out of you as a teacher, just as you're expecting the best out of them? What's happening here? And the more that I've talked with teachers about really unpacking it, I'm a fan of questions. The answers you give me will find more questions until there's no more questions, and teachers feel confident and happy about their stance on where they are in terms of that that relational space between themselves and students. Yeah. I'll just continue to read the chat.
A couple of questions in there. One about, could you please explain the Autobot but not bot idea?
Autobot, sure. Autobot, like, you know, when you're thinking about robots, it's most of the Pacific, the gifted Pacific learners I've come across is they have a real deep sense of commitment. You know, and it's one of the identifiers that I talk about in my work is that commitment to excellence and the resilience and the representation. So for being an Autobot, it's like it's maintaining that high moral ground, that cultural ground, that if you are raised in a way that you're led to believe that your ethnicity is a superpower, that your culture is a carrier of success and not a barrier. That is a key message that I think our gifted Pacific learners know really well. They're really good at chopping and changing, at oscillating, and being adaptable in spaces. And it's been really funny over the years as I've taught gifted students. Um, they're really clever at using their giftedness to get away from situations or skirt over things. And so, when they have that kind of little cunning, smart ass, wisecrack way of thinking, it's been really good to connect with them on that level.
A couple more questions in there.
Yeah.
One of them is, I'm curious about the generalized generational consequences of the frequently limited definition of the term giftedness in Pacific communities. I think there was a
right. I think in communities, they don't use the word giftedness. Say, when I went to do that work, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, the question I asked my parents was, for each of the different island groups, I asked them, okay, so for the Niuean parent, I asked them, what is like the most excellent example of what it means to grow up Niuean? Like, what are the attributes of what it means to be proud to be Niuean? So I had to access the cultural pride. And that was a doorway in for parents to really unpack that. Yeah, in terms of the intergenerational things, it's definitely raising of the awareness, and it's that kind of thing where we don't want people to be, to show off or that kind of thing or be whakahihi, but it's give credit where credit is due. Our people know that if you are gifted in our languages and our protocols, that when you stand in front of people and you can confidently represent your blood, your toto, that's the main thing. And even if you make mistakes, but you keep trying, it's the growth there. I think our Pacific elders always appreciate people that keep trying, and keep trying to persist, irrespective of how they might be viewed or may feel, not really belonging to the community, but keep persisting and just keep trying.
Ryan has asked, he was wondering if you feel that Pacifica are put into categories like performer, joker, strongman, and they are their expected strengths and gifts, and should they have been facilitated to take part in more academic pursuits if they have gifts in logical or critical thinking?
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's also due to subject teachers, like to if you really knew the learners, you would kind of steer them towards, having those types of experiences. At primary school level, I feel the parents are much more involved in what's happening, and I feel once they hit high school level, they kind of a bit hands off because they feel out of their depth, or they're just really busy. They feel that they're old enough to manage their own learning. But I feel that it's entertaining the idea that there is more beyond that. I mean, I was a clown and a joker my whole life growing, and that was because I was bored in class. I'd finish the work and then sit there and crack jokes with other girls because I went to an all-girls high school. Used to get in trouble for that, and then go have detention in the music room, and then just go write songs. And look, 20, 30 years later, now I made a career of that stuff, So there are some students that don't belong in some spaces. But if teachers know how to capitalize on their strengths, to capitalize on, what brings them joy, and what really, feeds into that passion, that'll help.
It really unfolds well into Melissa's question, talking about South Auckland in particular, where there's just a huge percentage of Pacifica learners, but underrepresentation in many of the gifted education programs. And she was just wondering if you could talk about what you see as the potential reasons for some of that underrepresentation?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of lack of awareness sometimes in our communities. I find that with the work that I'm doing currently with lots of Pacific communities, I've had to study up a lot on all of the documentation, and then I go out into the community and unpack it for them, just to let them know, do you guys know that this is available? These are the people you need to connect with, and I can broker a meeting and make sure that you're safe in that space. And so there's all of these kinds of things that happen in the background to make sure that you facilitate the raising of the awareness, raising the profile in terms of the underrepresentation. So it's really getting them connected to a network of people that will help raise that awareness and put them into spaces where they're entitled to be but don't know exist.
I love your phrase you said a little earlier about a carrier of success, not a barrier to success. And ties in a lot also with, Dr. Matt talking about confidence to be empowered, and Janelle's really asking us to question what we currently believe and what we're currently looking at and looking for. So lots of links in there. I'm just having a quick scroll through, but I think that's lots of thank yous, which I shall pass on to you if you haven't had a chance to look. But a huge whaftai lava from me, and I'm going to ask Shah to pop her sound on, and there she is, thank you, and just to say a message from us. Thank you, Shah.
Talofa, e mua nā o whawhitai I le tama o le langi o nā o lona to singa alofa ia I tātou. Whawhitai e lau sosonga Aiono Manu whaia, ona o le whasoa mai, ma tufa mai lo malama. Ia wha manawia te le atua, tātou wha tāsinga. Thank you so much, Manu, for everything that you've shared with us today. What I said before, I'll translate it very quickly now, is first of all, I would like to thank our Father in Heaven for giving us this opportunity and blessings and the love and the care you have for us and sharing your knowledge with us today. Aiono Manu, I remember many years ago when we first started our teaching journey at Epsom Teachers College. I used to see you in the CAF, and I too followed the ethnomusicology path, going to Auckland Uni under the tutelage of Richard Boyle and Greg Booth. And I relate so much to everything that you have shared with us today, particularly the Kakakala framework. I wasn't aware of it, and I know that for us that are on this journey together, it's empowering to learn more. And I know that Janelle shared previously about the Maya Angelou quote, our journey, and what we learn, we can make better and do more. I noticed on one of your slides you had a symbol of the migration bird, frigate bird, from esteemed Samoan artist Whatuwheu. And I see that as very much a journey that we're all going on together, learning about Pacific learners and how we can best learn about them first, and also have at the table our families to help share and develop and encourage our learners to do more and give back. I know that a Samoan quote that's often quoted is "Ile ala, ile pulu, o le tautua," and that means the pathway to leadership is through service. And this is, something that that as a person that has 2 feet in both the Samoan and Māori culture, we both, this is very important to our people. So thank you again for sharing everything with us, and we hope to hear from you more, particularly, you know, to see how, you know, there might be new understandings and learnings coming from, you know, our esteemed university counterparts that could share more about Pacific learners. And yeah, and from my heart, thank you very much.
Thank you. Just before you answer, you mentioned that alanga poe, that proverbial expression in Māori, Katoki, o le ala i pule tautua. I've actually written an article on that as a life cycle model for Samoans. So happy to share that with everybody. I'll send that through Deb, because it does talk about it's intergenerational. So I talk about serve to serve, serve to lead, and lead to serve. So it's from children, parents, grandparents, these areas that go, you know. So I love conceptualizing models. So happy to share that with everybody after this as well. So yeah, thank you so much. Malo lava.